Food is more than just what's on our plate. It's the places where it's grown, it's the people who grow it, and so much more. Join me, Janice Person, your host, on Grounded by the Farm every other week as we talk about the foods we love. Hey everybody, this is Janice, and I am so excited to continue our series on the holidays as we head into not only Halloween, but we have Thanksgiving and Christmas. This is one of those holiday things that I think a lot of us really look forward to, and it's sugar. We're talking with Rebecca Larson, who, while she's not a farmer, she works on the science side of farming, and she works with hundreds of farmers as part of her job. We are going to talk about all things sugar. First off, I love that she was willing to break down all the differences in brown sugar, confectionary sugar, molasses, cane, and beet sugar, all those kind of things. We do get more into the science than normal, but then we get into her talking about booing her neighbors with some homemade graham crackers that have imprints of spiders on them. So we've got pictures of those, and you're going to love them. All of that's going to be up on groundedbythefarm.com. But she also talks to us about some of the things she does around Christmas and things that sugar does beyond sweetening what we're eating. So can't wait for you guys to sit back and listen to this one. I certainly learned a lot and hope you do too. So I wanted to start out, since you are a scientist, maybe you could tell me a bit of your background, how you got into science and how that fits with farming.
Well, I've always been curious in science and how things work, and my passion for science really came about for a passion of disease. I loved reading books like The Hot Zone and learning about Ebola when I was a kid.
Yeah.
It was just really fascinating. And so as a city girl, I didn't really know much about plants. So I started off college as a pre-med student, as I think a lot of people do, but have a horrible, horrible fear of blood. So that was a really poor career choice.
Right.
Fortunately, I had a really great advisor that as a junior actually in college mentioned to me that, hey, if you like disease, did you know plants get sick? And I thought, oh, no, I had no idea. And so that's where I decided to go into graduate school and learn about plant pathology, or the diseases of plants, and how to prevent them.
That's amazing. Where did you go to college?
So I got my bachelor's degree from St. Cloud State University in Minnesota.
Okay.
And then I went to Montana State University in Bozeman and earned my PhD there.
Oh, God, I love Bozeman. What a beautiful place, too, right?
Oh, it's a wonderful place, yep.
The university is nice, but there's such a great food culture and such great breweries and all. I'm a fan of Bozeman. So why don't we start with some of the science-y side of sugar? You know, there are different sources. Frequently when I'm out in the grocery store or at a restaurant, I see things that are pure cane sugar. You work with sugar beets.
Yep.
Can you help me understand, is the chemistry of sugar always the same and the source is different, or how does all that work?
Yeah, so sugar is sugar. It's 99.999% sucrose.
Okay.
So the plant that it's derived from doesn't really make a difference whether it's sugar beet or sugar cane. The end product is a refined sucrose, which is just a glucose and a fructose molecule stuck together. And here's a shameful fact for you. As a born and raised Minnesotan, where over 50% of domestic sugar beets are grown, I did not know what a sugar beet was until I was 21 years old and moved to Montana. But yeah, 55% of the sugar in the United States comes from sugar beets.
Right. And you're from Minnesota. Sugar beets are a big thing for farmers in that part of the world. Do you know where else it's grown? Sugar beets?
Sure. Yeah, so they're a temperate crop, which means that they like areas where there are 4 seasons throughout the year. And so Montana, Idaho, parts of Oregon, Washington, Wyoming, Nebraska, Colorado, Minnesota, North Dakota, and Michigan are the states that have sugar production in them.
And then sugar cane is a tropical plant. So there's not much in the U.S. I know a few farmers in Louisiana. Down in Florida, there was some sugar cane, but I'm not sure there's much more in the U.S. Is there?
Texas has a pocket, too, with the Rio Grande sugarcane farmers.
Yeah, okay, good. That's just good to know. And then in the U.S., we also use high fructose corn syrup, which is a sweetener. Is it also sucrose? Is it the same as
No,
sugar?
it's not. It's made out of, so as I mentioned, sucrose is a glucose and a fructose molecule that are stuck together. High fructose corn syrup are independent molecules.
Okay.
So they sell different blends of them. So it's primarily fructose. That's why it's called high fructose corn syrup.
Right.
But they come in, I think, 55% and 60% blends with glucose. So
Okay.
it's those individual components of sucrose.
Good. See, you're helping me understand the science already. And what about like fruits? So strawberries have a good bit of sugar or fructose in them, right?
Yeah, they have monosaccharides, which would be fructose and glucose. They have disaccharides, which would be sucrose. And they also have polysaccharides in them that all add to that sweetness. So you could take pretty much any fruit and extract the sugar from it that you wanted to, but it really only makes sense to do that from a commercial standpoint with something that has a significant percentage of sugar in it, like a beet. Yeah.
So with sugar beets and sugar cane, when you process it, you're taking out that sucrose.
Correct.
Is that?
Yep.
Are there other byproducts then?
Oh, sure. So for a sugar beet, there's a lot of dry material left once you get all the sugar out of it. And so we sell that for animal feed, the pulp that's left over.
Okay.
We also get molasses out and some products like betaine. So there's some small kind of minor market byproducts that come out of sugar beets. And then with sugar cane, of course, you have all the stocks that are left over, and they don't sell that, but they use that to power their factories in order to get the energy that they need to refine the sugar.
Very cool. You said the word molasses, and I'm like a Southerner, right? And I just immediately went back to seeing molasses cooked down when I was a kid. It's kind of like, I think people in the far northern parts of the country know more about maple syrup being cooked down. And I remember that process with molasses, sort of, so you could use it on biscuits.
Oh, yeah. You would never want to do that with beet molasses because if you think about the way that a table beet tastes, it has I love it. It's an earthy flavor to it. Beet molasses has that kind of undertone to it.
Oh, okay.
So if you go to a store and you buy molasses, it only can come from cane.
Yeah.
And so even brown sugar that we make, which is white sugar with a little bit of molasses in it, we actually add cane molasses to our beet sugar in order to make brown sugar because the molasses from beets taste terrible.
That's amazing because the next question was, okay, help me understand brown sugar versus white sugar. So that seems clear. What's confectionary sugar then?
So it's just a finer grain of white granulated sugar. Okay. And then there are agents like cornstarch added to it to keep it from forming a solid brick, essentially. So that powdery texture, there's a little bit of cornstarch in there.
Okay. And then I see different size crystals. Sometimes things are sold as raw sugar. Does that mean they haven't extracted the molasses from it?
Yeah, so sugar in the raw comes only from cane, not from beets. And that's because of that molasses taste that I was just describing. But with sugar in the raw, cane actually goes through a 2-step cleanup process to remove the molasses from the sugar granules. And so sugar in the raw is just one step. So they still left a little bit of that molasses in the white crystal.
Wow. Okay, so we have gone deeper in science, I think, in this episode than we ever have before. But part of it for me was trying to understand sugar because I think I use sugar. I think I eat sugar, but I don't think about it as much as maybe I should or understand it. You know, I think a lot of us have gone through periods of time where we want to limit our sugar intake or at least pay attention to our sugar intake, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a little bit different. So can you help me understand? You said we in a few places, like we make brown sugar. So maybe I ought to ask you to explain. You work for a company called Western Sugar. It's a co-op, right?
It is a co-op.
Maybe you can explain who they are and what you do.
Sure. So I have the pleasure of having 851 small family farmers as my employer. So these guys own farms in Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska, and Colorado. The average size acreage, we represent about 5% of the domestic sugar market, 10% of the domestic beets. If you look at the total number of acres that we produce, it's about 111,000. So it's about 150 acres of sugar beets per grower. Of course, it's not equal distribution. But yeah, those farmers own everything from the planting of the seed to the sale of the sugar. So they control the entire process. And I help them in agronomic practices. So my team and I run official variety trials, determining what seed's going to have the right kind of disease package and performance. I also help them with their data tracking on farm, so that when we're expected to provide information on the impact of their farming operations, we can do that in a very concise and scientific fashion.
Oh, fantastic. So you're really looking at that science across sugar. I mean, I had you answering a lot of questions about the sugar makeup, but you're also looking at the science on farm. And some of that would be like sustainability and sort of soil impacts and things along that line.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a lot of initiatives going internally looking at soil health in particular. I mean, we're looking at ways, if you have healthy soil, you can sequester more carbon, you have better productivity on your ground. And it's been a change of culture over the last couple of decades, where it used to be, let's do no harm in farming.
Right.
Let's leave things the way we found them. Now it's more about regenerative ag and how do we leave things even better for the next generation. And so we look at the numbers and the impact using very complicated models to try and figure out how do those cultural practices that are being employed impact soil health, carbon emissions, water quality. And then we share that back with our growers to try and help them with continuous improvement.
That's amazing. I think I've been lucky enough to, at several times, get to meet a lot of farmers on the sugar side. I call them my sugar peeps or my sweet peeps. I found a lot of them are doing exactly what you mentioned, and that's kind of that evolution from, what the impact on the farm used to be for their parents or grandparents or something like that, and trying to then go to how can I make this so much better for my children or my grandchildren to take it over. And really getting a depth of knowledge of science is so critical in understanding that. I think you forget how much soil science there is. Kind of like you said, you didn't know there was plant disease.
Oh, yeah.
It's the same thing when it comes to soil. So a lot of us probably in school studied, the basic layers of soil, but not necessarily the different chemistry makeups of sands versus clays versus all those different classifications, and how much plant matter one needs to really get to the next level with providing its own nutrients. And those are the kinds of things you work with them on.
Yeah, and it goes one step beyond that, is looking at soil as a living entity, which gets really complicated for people because you think of it as just a bag of dirt, or a plot of dirt. But there's so many little microbes that exist within the soil, and anytime that soil is disturbed, it disturbs that population. So one of our major areas of emphasis within our co-op is using conservation tillage so that you're not disturbing the whole soil surface, so that you keep the earthworms happy, you keep the beneficial fungi in the environment and microbes in the environment happy and healthy, because those little critters that are there interacting with one another oftentimes will give you better nutrient cycling, so building up the organic matter faster, which leads to higher crop productivity, or even provide antagonistic interactions with some of the bad actors in the soil that could cause plant disease. So knowing what's there and how to foster the good guys in the soil is really critical.
It's interesting how I didn't realize there were people that had PhDs in soil and water relations and stuff at one time in my life. So the depth of science really blows me away. So now Western Sugar, is sugar the only thing you guys do?
Yeah, of course, our farmers grow a lot of different crops.
Right.
But the one thing that ties them all together are sugar beets. And so they'll grow a lot of different things in rotation with those beets. We have a lot of small grains, corn, dry beans. We have quite a diversity of what's produced here. But as far as Western Sugar is focused, our focus is just producing sugar from sugar beets is our main bread and butter.
Yeah, I'd love to tell you a short story about a visit I had in Indiana a couple of years ago. My friend Leah Beyer, she had us over. We were doing an event at her home, and the caterers set up a s'mores bar, and they did artisan marshmallows. And so they had like triple chocolate marshmallows or all these different things.
That's fantastic.
But as I talked to the chef that was doing this, who was developing all these things, she knew that the sugar in that came from Michigan sugar beet. And so here I was just all focused on my palate and s'mores. And she said, yeah, well, it comes from sugar beets. So help me understand, what are some of the other things that you make with beet sugar, with just sugar, I guess, that are tasty treats that you really love? Are there some things you do for either Halloween or the other holidays?
We don't make or sell anything directly, of course.
Oh, no, I mean at home.
Oh, sure. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. So I have a 5-year-old son who loves holidays as much as I do. So for Halloween this year, we're kind of contemplating what's going to happen with trick-or-treating.
Right.
Are we going to be able to have those kind of interactions? And so we are actually working on making some specialty bundles. I don't know if you've ever heard of this process of you've been booed. So we're making homemade s'mores packages for our neighbors. And so I just found a recipe on Pinterest to make homemade graham crackers. And I have this excellent cookie cutter that I got off of Etsy that can make a round graham cracker with the indentation of a spider on the top.
Oh,
and
get out.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to need that link to wherever you found that. That is so fun.
Yeah, I will send you some pictures. I actually posted them on Twitter recently of my cookies that I made with the same cookie cutter. But Smashmallow, when you talk about specialty marshmallows, makes some excellent flavors, including a pumpkin spice marshmallow that they have out for Halloween or for the fall in general.
Yeah.
And then this is going to sound ridiculous. It took me until 43 years of age and seeing a link on Pinterest to realize you don't have to just use Hershey's bars on s'mores, that you can put any old kind of chocolate you want to on there. So in these specialty packages that I'll be handing out to people with our homemade graham crackers, I'll include some of those pumpkin spice marshmallows, regular marshmallows, and Reese's Peanut Butter Cup pumpkins, because I have found Reese's Peanut Butter Cups are my favorite on s'mores. No need for Hershey's bars anymore.
So I'm a fan of the special dark chocolates. You know, it could be the Hershey's Special Dark or Ghirardelli dark chocolates and something. Because for me, probably as a kid, I loved that much sugar of the marshmallow and the really sweet chocolates.
Oh, sure.
But I love the combination with dark chocolates.
Yeah, getting something bitter in there is fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it really is like that taste profile shifts a little bit for you. So that sounds awesome. What about Thanksgiving or Christmas? Is your family really into some sweets around that time period?
Yeah, I go a little bit bonkers. So I was really nervous football season wasn't going to happen this year because football season provides my peace and quiet for cookie baking. And as soon as I'm done with my harvest of sugar beets, I spend every weekend baking Christmas cookies and putting them in the freezer for a party that I throw the first weekend in December, where I'll bake 25 different varieties of Christmas cookies that are all decorated in a way to tell a story that's famous from Christmas. So last year I did Polar Express. The year before that I did the Grinch. And this year I'm doing Christmas Vacation. Yeah.
Christmas Vacation. Tell me how you do that.
Yeah, I do a combination. So doing 25 that are all intricately decorated like that is really difficult. So I usually do half crinkle cookies and half of the decorated cookies. And so, yeah, I don't do traditional sugar cookies. I try and look for lots of different varieties. So I have like a rolled s'mores, a cookies and cream cookie that are all cut in different shapes and then decorated. So I'm making Cousin Eddie's RV, the 1972 Condor. I have a spray can that has the non-nutritive cereal varnish that I'll be making, the Jelly of the Month
I
Club.
think we're going to need a follow-up video of all these cookies. Like,
yeah, I'd be happy to send
I know
them
the
to you.
episode of the podcast will long be past, but we will be bringing this back up because the pictures that you're drawing in my mind right now are blowing my mind. So now your guests come to this incredible party. Do they have to watch the movie or read the books ahead of time?
Most of the time, no, because the cookie buffet is followed up with, I rent out a local guy in Longmont has a company called Brew Hop Trolley. And so I rent out the trolley and we take a tour looking at Christmas lights and stop at some different breweries and distilleries and just make a nice night out of it.
Yeah.
And we do random trivia when we're on the trolley, where I give out the trivia cards for free drinks wherever we stop. But this year is going to be a little different because we don't know what's going to happen with COVID and everything else going on in the world. That I have warned everyone what the theme is for this year, because most of the time people don't know. So in the Save the Dates, I told them it's going to be Christmas Vacation, and all of our trivia is going to revolve around the movie. So I said you might want to watch it once, twice, 10 times, so that you can be able to win some excellent Christmas Vacation themed prizes this year.
I was going to say, that's one of those movies a lot of us watch every year, but I would still want to rewatch it a few times to make sure I could win all the gifts.
Yeah, we need to make it kind of tricky, and we just to keep it kind of spicy, not knowing where we're going to be able to stop or what else we're going to be able to do is we're going to give away the prizes in the white elephant style, so there'll be a little bit of competition to see
so
who can
funny.
have what.
That's so funny. The folks that you ever have come over, do they all assume that you're only cooking with beet sugar? Do you use cane sugar at home?
I really don't. I have a lot of loyalty towards my employer, right. So I always buy our branded sugar whenever I go to the grocery store. There were a few times this last winter, early spring, when everything was missing from the shelves and there was no other option but to be able to buy, C&H. So I did buy some cane sugar. But no, I'm pretty religious about buying GW sugar.
That's funny. Is it sold in a GW bag, or is it branded by various stores, or what?
It goes into a lot of different bags, and so our GW bag is our own brand that's sold in grocery stores. It's usually sold in grocery stores that are geographically close to us.
Yeah.
It's also put into store brand bags as well.
Okay.
And so there are a lot of different store brands that contain our sugar, and they make the same chain of stores may sell many different varieties, beet and cane sugar, within their bags.
Right.
It just depends on what's geographically closest, because sugar all sells for about the same price. It's really the freight difference. So you're going to take whatever's closest to you. And same thing with things that are manufactured from sugar. You'll notice on a can of soda, it'll say made with sugar or high fructose corn syrup. It's going to depend on where that bottling plant is, whether they're using beet sugar, cane sugar, high fructose corn syrup. It's all about what's closest.
Yeah. Well, since I grew up in the South, I was really familiar with cane sugar because it used to say cane sugar, because then it came from people the next state away or something, right? And there's kind of that regional pride. But are members of your family always aware that they can use beet sugar in their things? Maybe like hard candies?
Oh, it's funny that you say that. So my mother, bless her heart, is no longer with me, but she believed that you could not make hard candy with beet sugar. And a lot of that generation still believes that. And it was true at one point in time, back in the 1930s, 1940s, because there was a specific defoaming agent that had to be used in the extraction of beets that wasn't used in cane. So for specific things, it was difficult to use them interchangeably. Yeah. But that's not been true since the 1940s, but there's still people that believe it. Then I recently came across a recipe for a creme brulee that insisted you had to use cane sugar for it because beet sugar wouldn't caramelize, but that's not how it works anymore these days. The only sugar you cannot 100% make from beets is brown sugar because of the molasses.
So that caramelization process, that's a piece of sugar that I think a lot of us don't think about. And actually in our episode on onions, we actually talked about how some onions have more sugars in them and they caramelize better than other onions. So what else does sugar offer us besides that sweetness?
So oftentimes if there's a sugar reduction happening in an ingredient, the texture is going to change. Yep. So there's a certain texture on your palate that's provided from sugar. So if you switch to an artificial sweetener that delivers a lot more sweetness in a smaller volume, you have to put fibers and things in there in order to create that same texture. But it's also really important for leavening. So if you include it in something like bread, the yeast feed on that sugar in order to give rise to that bread as well.
Okay.
Once it's a quick bread, of course. And then preserving is also really important. So you think about jams and jellies, just like pickles are preserved with salts, jams and jellies are preserved with that high concentration of sugar that's in there.
I hadn't really thought about that. So sugar beets is different than beets,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
What are those differences?
They are actually the exact same species and genus. They're both Beta vulgaris. The only thing that's different is the physical characteristics, the phenotype, what they're physically expressing has been selected to be different, as well as the concentration of sugar. So sugar beets have been selected to be larger and white and contain more sugar, where table beets have been selected for various color characteristics, whether they be yellow or red or purple, and they're much smaller. So a sugar beet is about, if I just had to give a rough estimate, 10 or 15 times larger than a red beet would be. And they're also bright white in color when you cut them open.
Now, I know you say they're bright white. And I'm just going to say they don't look bright white when they're coming out of the field, right? So it's what's been next to all the dirt and, the outside of the beet and all that kind of stuff is what I usually see. Because when I saw sugar beets the first time, I thought it was a truckload of boulders.
Oh, yeah. They kind of look like the exterior is like a turnipy color, or kind of like jicama, where it's that kind of really light tan color. But yeah, there's a bit of dirt. I mean, when they go to the piling stations,
tannish, grayish, whatever. Yeah. It's very earthen colored. And I think, do they go in first and they cut the tops off so there's not the big green,
Yeah,
the big green leaves aren't there anymore?
In the harvesting process, they use something called a defoliator that has a whole bunch of rubber fingers underneath it that flail around and whip all of those green leaves off, and then there's some knives.
I wish people could see the video, because she had her fingers flailing around to show it to me. I'll see if I can find a video somewhere online.
Yeah, I don't know how else to describe it. I talk with my hands. But so those rubber flails knock all of the green material off. That essentially becomes a green manure in the field then. And then they go through and they scalp them. So there's some knives on the back of those defoliators. And then they'll come through with the beet digger or the harvester that actually lifts them up and out of the ground. But we'll actually reject delivery of beets if they have too much top left on them, because it can plug up the factory. It's not good for them when they're in storage either, because if that green material is still there, the beets sit in a pile for 90 to 120 days or more, depending on the region. Right. And that will cause regrowth, that it takes energy to regrow leaves. And so you end up burning through that sugar that you took all season to produce in that root.
Yeah. Well, it's just so amazing to think about, harvesting sugar. Is there a smell that's kind of sweet to that process?
Yeah, you can smell that little bit of sweetness in the field, but you also smell vegetable. Because it is a root crop. It smells a bit like a table beet does. It has that kind of earthy smell with a little bit more sweet undertone to it than if it was just a beet. And same thing with the factories. When the factories are running prime time and everything's running real well, it smells like boiling beets. It smells like baking vegetables when you drive past the factory, with a little hint of sweet to it.
And I guess part of that in the field is because when you're pulling it out of the ground, when you're cutting it out of the ground, you're leaving some of the roots and stuff. You're actually disconnecting pieces of the smaller root structures, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we should probably treat our beets a bit more like people treat their potatoes in harvest, a little more gently than we do. But when we're pulling beets out of the ground, for the most part, they'll come up intact. I mean, there'll be some lateral roots and things that are very small that get left behind. But as it goes up through the harvester, you do have tails breaking off, so the very tips of the beets will come off, and those will be left in the field. They're also, you may end up having seeds that are twins and things like that, where there are little beets that are growing in there. If your singulation wasn't that great, there's seed spacing. There'll be some tinier beets that don't get picked up by those digger wheels and are kicked back into the field. So they're chunks that are left behind.
Some of them get a little bit cut off of them or something in the process, right? So it's just opened up and exposed a little bit. So how do you make sure, how does the plant actually process that then? To take it from a beet from the field, what's the process to get from that to what I put on my table?
So in a really high level, it's essentially taking the beets into the factory, cutting them up into a combination of French fry and waffle fry kind of structures that we call cassettes. Those go into a giant diffusion tank. So it's essentially just allowing that sugar to go from those root chunks into the liquid. And then the root chunks that are left over become that pulp once they're dried and shipped off. And we sell some of that fresh too. But so then you take that liquid, and it's a process of essentially boiling it down and then forcing crystallization. And then you have a final centrifuging process to get the little bit of water or moisture that's left in there. And you rinse it a little bit to get anything else that might be stuck on the outside of the crystal off. But yeah, it's a letting it diffuse, boiling down, centrifuging after crystallization. That's roughly what it is.
I can guarantee you the next time I make sweet tea and I'm putting sugar in or something, I'm going to be looking at that a little bit differently. Sugar is going to be a little bit more, I think I'm a little bit more curious about it. Just haven't talked about it so much, about the different things that it does, about the different ways that you can process it to do different things. I mean, like confectionery sugar is so great for some things that I can't imagine how you would do some of those things without it being in that process that has that little bit of cornstarch, so that it's pretty wild.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you get to consider yourself a bit of an expert, or do you say you have more expertise in sugar? Where's that line of expert versus expertise?
Gosh, this is my 21st harvest working with sugar beets.
Wow.
I've never worked with any other crop as intimately as I've worked with sugar beets. I've had jobs where I've worked with some other crops in kind of a peripheral role, but this has been my bread and butter. And I would say I wouldn't have the passion that I have for agriculture if I wasn't introduced to it through the beet industry. It's a very special little community. It's 1 million acres compared to 90 million acres of corn. It's all grower owned. So the growers are extremely vested in the process and very supportive of science. And so someone like me doing science for them, they've always been extremely supportive of me. I think I know more now about sugar than the average person. So I think I have some expertise in sugar beets, but have I mastered everything in beets? Absolutely not. There's so much more to know. I think I've held pretty much every job you possibly can within the beet industry over these past 21 years, but where I've landed today is definitely a great place to be.
But I think that kind of goes with science. Like in science, very few people want to call themselves an expert. People like to say they have a certain amount of expertise or they've gained a certain amount of experience. There's always so much more to know. And I think sometimes when you're just going through life and you're picking something off of the shelf or something, sometimes that curiosity gets sparked and you start learning more, and other times it takes something else to spark that curiosity for you. So I appreciate your spending this time with us, because I think you probably created some curiosity moments for people. If they wanted to get in touch, I know I talk to you on Twitter sometimes. Are there places where our listeners could kind of give you a shout if they had other questions I failed to ask?
Oh, sure. I have... my only social media account is Twitter, and I was forced to get that a while ago. So, yeah, you can find me there at @sugaryfacts. Also, you could look at our website, westernsugar.com, and all of our contact information is on there as well. If anybody has any specific questions about sugar beets, sugar beet agronomy, whatever, they're more than welcome to reach out to me.
And I also saw there's a website, sugar.org, that does a good job of answering questions that people have, sort of generally asked about, the difference between brown sugar and others, or, some of the processing. So that may be another thing to add into the mix.
Oh, yeah. I cannot say enough wonderful things about Dr. Courtney Gain, who runs a sugar association associated with sugar.org. She is a phenomenal dietitian. She can answer all kinds of different questions about sugar, and she has a great team working for her.
Right. And when you work in sugar, a lot of people want to talk to dietitians, my guess is. It is one of those pieces, much like gluten, much like other pieces, that just kind of make people want to know and understand their diet a little bit better. So I think getting more information and sugary facts as you go by on Twitter. I hope, even though somebody made you get a Twitter account, I hope now you enjoy it.
I am not very good at social media. I think that's part of my problem. And so it's difficult if you don't really understand how to master the tool to really get into it. But I do. I mean, it is. I have people that I like to follow that bring me joy for sure, and there are things that drive me absolutely ape when I open up that app as well.
Right.
That I wish didn't have to pop up in my feed. But maybe I'll get smart enough one day to just narrow it down to the things that bring me joy.
Yeah. Well, I would love it if you'd send us, sort of a couple of your cookie recipes. We love sharing those, and people love getting a new recipe. So if we could get that, as well as like the link to how you figured out how to do those Pinteresty kind of things for Halloween, I'll include all that in the show notes so people could follow up and have some different kinds of treats. I like to mix the traditional with some of the newer different things, right? So in my family at Christmas, my mom always fixed something called spritz cookies, which are, pressed through, and we'd make them in the shape of like poinsettias or Christmas wreaths or stars. But I also like to put in some new things here and there. And the great thing about cookies is you can have one cookie here and one cookie there. It's not like you're committing to a huge piece of something, cookies and pies, and you can cut little slivers of pie.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'll send you the link for the cookie cutter too.
Yeah, that'd be great. Well, Rebecca, thank you again for your time. I'm looking forward to this getting out there. I think you've answered a lot of questions that people may not even have realized that are boiling around in their heads. But I know for one, if it tells me to get brown sugar, by God, I better have brown sugar in this house versus the other. So nice to kind of understand what that's about.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time.
I hope you guys found that as interesting as I did. I really want to get invited to that epic Christmas party one year, so I'm going to be working hard on that. We're going to put some of these photos and all up on the website, so check it out at groundedbythefarm.com. Feel free to tell your friends who love the holiday foods the way I do to give us a listen. Next up, we're going to be talking about turkey. Yeah, we're talking turkey with a turkey farmer from Minnesota. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you guys giving us a listen and sharing us on social media. Talk to you soon.